Well, I'm sure I'm thankful to have this opportunity to be part of this all-star team of teachers this afternoon and to follow up with Ren's wonderful sharing. What I'm going to do is, again, focus on Joshua 10 and just kind of lead into this. The miracle of Joshua's long day was one of the ideas for it was a solar eclipse. So that's, kind of what this presentation is founded on, the dating of it and some of the history of it, and also some other implications that tie into that. So Joshua led the Israelites in the conquering and settlement of the promised land in Canaan, and starting with the miracle of the crossing of the Jordan River, the waters parted for them, taking Jericho and Ai. Joshua's next step was to pursue the Amorites while the hand of God rained destruction on the enemy in the form of a great hailstorm that, as we've already heard, killed more of the enemy than the Israelites did. Evidence points towards, actually away from a meteor shower and more towards a hailstorm, as no evidence for meteors have been found in Canaan other than Sodom and Gomorrah. So we'll kind of follow up on that in a little bit. But so from an astronomical perspective, one of the really key pieces of information to support an eclipse is that in this record in Joshua 10, the sun and the moon are found in the same part of the sky over Canaan. So this takes place due to what's called the eclipse cycle. And there's 13 lunations or new moons every year when the sun and moon share the same zodiacal longitude, or the longitude in the zodiac. A minimum of 2 of these are solar eclipses, occurring during the twice annual eclipse seasons, with each season of 37 days when the sun crosses the lunar node in its orbit. During the solar eclipses, the sun, moon, and earth and the nodes are all aligned on the same celestial plane, which results in the moon blocking the sun either totally or partially from Earth's point of view. So one of John's links up here, the first one is called the Calendar of the Biblical Patriarchs, and that is from the try-god.com site. And that contains some information that I'm covering with you on here. So that's something that you can refer to if you don't get it all. It's all laid out for you there. And so this explains the key astronomical cycle which governs the solar and lunar eclipses, and it documents the only times when the sun and moon are found together in the sky, which is the situation that we have here in Joshua 10. And at a solar eclipse, the sun, moon, earth, and nodes are all aligned in the same place, so that the moon blocks the sun either totally or partially from Earth's view. A total solar eclipse occurs when the node and the luminaries occupy the same longitude of the zodiac. So lunar eclipse is a result from the activities of the moon's monthly ascending and descending nodes. So depending on how the moon crosses over the ecliptic, it can either be coming from above or below. But they always lie opposite to one another on the ecliptic. The eclipses coincide with the moon's orbit intersecting the ecliptic, and solar and lunar eclipses only occur at full or new moons within a 6-degree range of the lunar node. The line connecting these nodes and the 2 dragon points associated with them are where the moon crosses the ecliptic, and that's called the line of nodes. So the motion of this mythic line generates an 18.618-year eclipse cycle, but the moon does not return to the same spot in the sky until it's completed 3 of these cycles, totaling just under 56 years. This is called the precession of the nodes. And the influence of the golden section or the phi ratio is apparent here, as it is in the Saros cycle, which is something we'll cover a little bit more with the eclipse of this Joshua 10, because during the 18.618 year eclipse cycle, the line of nodes recedes in the precession of the nodes 19.618 days each year. And the ancients believed that the lunar nodes were a large celestial dragon, which is predominantly in partial eclipses where they would conceive of that as a dragon taking a bite out of the sun, which is when the sun is partially covered by the moon. And you can read more about this and the aspects of what's called the draconic month, which are known as the head and tail of the dragon. R.H. Allen, in his book, Star Names, Their Lore and Meaning, has some good information on that. So to summarize, the first point then is that we all know that all the solar and lunar eclipses result from this understanding when the moon crosses the ecliptic or the path of the sun at the cycle of lunar nodes, and the only times the sun and moon are in the same part of the sky is when that happens, which again is what we're looking at here in Joshua chapter 10. So that's a good, strong piece of scientific evidence that this is indeed a solar eclipse. Many scholars favor a 1400 BC date for Joshua's conquest. This also includes Corville, which Reverend Nessel has mentioned many times during his Old Testament history class, and the chronology, how he's kind of an outlier from the conventional chronology, but definitely lines up with a lot of good stuff that we're working on here. And it lines up, of course, with Joshua's conquest and settlement of Canaan. And you can refer to this also in my blog in November, on November 30th, way back in 2022. And that details the solar eclipse of Joshua's long day. So according to some of these other scholars, they have, which I have, this eclipse of July 14th in 1405 BC, which was a total solar eclipse that was seen over Canaan. And my blog of November 30th kind of covers all the details with that. So we have in 1406, Jericho and Ai being conquered by Joshua, also in Gibeon, and also the conquest of Canaan included several other battles. All that took place in 1406. And as we have seen already, it was at least a 5-year period to conquer and settle the promised land. There's a few other years that could be put into that, where it could be up to 7 years. So just to kind of read through Joshua 10, 12 to 14 to kind of get a more in-depth feel for this from an eclipse standpoint. In verse 12, on that occasion, the Lord routed the Amorites before the Israelites. Joshua addressed the Lord and said in the sight of the Israelites, O sun at Gibeon, stand still, which is the word Dom, D-O-M. And O moon in the valley of Ajalon. The sun halted and the moon stood still, Amad, while the nation wreaked judgment on its foes, as it is written in the book of Jasher. Thus the sun stood still in mid-heaven and did not press on to set, or in parentheses, was delayed to set, as on an ordinary day. For the Lord fought for Israel. Neither before nor since has there ever been such a day, and the Lord acted on words spoken by man, for the Lord fought for Israel. So, as we mentioned, there are several rational interpretations that have been suggested for the miracle of the hailstones. And the key part to that is that if you look at the word for hail, which is going to come up here in a bit, it really kind of tells the story. So let's see. The darkening of the sun for a specific period of time in the past fits a description of the moon standing in front of the sun over the course of the same period. As is explained below, the standing of the moon, which itself stood and went dark in front of the sun, is the reason for the darkening of the sun. Thus, the two lines are not only connected in that one completes the other, but they also have a causative relationship. So here we're going to talk a little bit about Gibeon and the Valley of Aijalon, the geography of it. Commentators for all periods have interpreted this sentence as a synthetic parallelism. Each of the celestial bodies is seen from two different places over the city of Gibeon and over the Valley of Aijalon. This, however, created a problem understanding the role of the moon and the reason for its mention in the description of the miracle that occurred during the day. As will be explained below, we have not a synthetic parallelism here, but a synonymous parallelism in which the sun and moon are described as if both stood in the same place. The names of the places over which the sun and moon were observed are preceded by the preposition be, which creates a picture of a person viewing the cosmic event from the north or from the northeast vicinity of Gibeon, looking south or southwest and seeing the sun standing approximately over the city of Gibeon. The ancient city of Gibeon, which has been identified definitively with Al-Jib, lies on the western slopes of the northern Judean highlands, and a very short distance to the west are the tributaries that form the beginning of the Aijalon stream, called the Wadi Salman, and at the start of the important route to the Mediterranean shore by way of the slope of Beth Horon, which is where the hail started to fall. For an observer looking in the direction of the sun in the afternoon from the northeast, there would have been no way to distinguish precisely between Gibeon and the beginning or even the continuation of the Valley of Aijalon when it came to an event that was not occurring in the place on the ground, but rather above it in the sky. So because of this synonymous parallelism, where the approximate location in the sky over which the miracle occurred is presented in two different ways for the sake of variation, this is typical of this type of parallelism. The first colon refers to Gibeon, which is higher and therefore closer to what's happening in the sky. The second colon refers to the valley below it. And there's some stuff, other occurrences where this is kind of clarified, which we're getting into now. Our verse describes the sun and the moon standing together in the sky approximately over the city of Gibeon and beginning in the valley of Aijalon. So before I jump to Isaiah 28 here, I just wanted to finish up a little bit on the hailstones. And we'll see this confirmed a little bit in Isaiah 28, because verse 17, the word hail is the same as the word for hail in Joshua 10. And it's Strong's number 1259, and it's used in Exodus chapter 9 about half a dozen times, 9, 18, 23, 28, 33, and 34. And it refers to meteorological hail that is actually accompanied by rain in the context. So it's not a meteor shower that we're talking about. And like we said, there's no evidence of a meteor shower that's ever been found in Israel other than Sodom and Gomorrah. So Isaiah 28, starting in verse 16, says, "Therefore, thus says the Lord, behold, I lay in Zion a stone for a foundation, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. Whoever believes will not act hastily." Verse 17, also, I will make justice the measuring line and righteousness the plummet, and the hail will sweep away the refuge of lies, and the waters will overflow the hiding place. So that's the reference to the hail that I mentioned, which is the same word in Joshua 10. And there's another connection to Joshua here in this immediate context down in verse 21. It says, "For the Lord will rise up as at Mount Perazim, and he will be angry as in the valley of Gibeon, that he may do his work, his awesome work, and to bring to pass his act, his unusual act. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against the tribes that were inhabiting the promised land, that he was leading Joshua's army and killing more of the enemy than Joshua's army was. So this is a real interesting connection here with the hail and with the eclipse that happened in the Valley of Gibeon. And there's a spatial perspective that's also reflected in Isaiah 28:21, which recounts the miracle of the raining hailstones from Joshua 10. It says, he will rage as in the Valley of Gibeon. Gibeon does not actually have a valley. It is possible that the Valley of Gibeon is the plateau known as the Gibeon Plateau, the mostly flat area in which the tell that has been definitely identified with ancient Gibeon is located. The Gibeon Plateau lies on the west of the watershed, and the banks of it that drain are actually the beginning of the Ihalon River. Alternatively, it may also refer to the valley of Ihalon itself, since the Beth Horon ascent and its tributaries that flow out of the Gibeon Plateau toward the west connect Gibeon to the valley of Ihalon, forming a shared geospatial perspective. So if this verse is understood in this way, the city name means in the vicinity or in the region of Gibeon. And there's other occurrences that we find in scripture. For example, in Joshua 5:13, referencing in Jericho means in the vicinity of Jericho, not as far as Gilgal. And in Gibbethon in 1 Kings 15:27 clearly refers to the vicinity of the city of Gibbethon and not the city itself, since the city was under siege at that point. Likewise, in Joshua 10, who inflicted the great slaughter on Gibeon refers to the vicinity of Gibeon, and a similar note of description occurs in Psalm 83:10 and 11. The text recalls the victory of Barak and Deborah over the Canaanites in the battle fought in the Jezreel Valley on the bank of the Kishon River. That's in Judges 4 and 5. So that's real interesting, and it kind of gives you a solid explanation of how the sun and moon being in the same part of the sky could be over those different geographies, which are actually very related and very close to each other. Another thing that I want to tie in here is the Valley of the Philistines in Jeremiah 47:5. You can turn there. Actually relates to, if you look at the blog that I have up for it's actually the November blog, which is the actual blog that I did originally on the Joshua 10 eclipse. And I didn't tell John to put that one up, but it's November of 22. And, there's a reference there. There's a piece in the Egyptian Museum, which actually predates and ties into this period of the 1400 BC era. And you can go, on the blog and read about that. But the reference to Philistia in Jeremiah 47:1, the word came to Jeremiah the prophet against the Philistines before Pharaoh attacked Gaza. So that shows the Egyptians on a military campaign in Gaza. And behold, the waters rise up out of the north as an overflowing flood. And if we skip on down to verse 5, it says, baldness has come upon Gaza. Ashkelon is cut off with the remnant of their valley. So again, there's Ashkelon with its valley, just like we talked about here in the vicinity of. And Ashkelon is one of the references on this Egyptian museum piece that dates back before the Minerva stele, which is also in my blog. So that's a real key piece where the timing of this really plays out into the 1400 BC era. So this relationship with Isaiah 28 is real interesting, So the first graphic that John has for me up here is going to be the 2015 blog. And I'm going to lead into it with a little bit on the Great Pyramid, because as we read in Isaiah 28:16, it says, "Behold, I lay in Zion a stone for a foundation, a tried and precious cornerstone and a sure foundation." And this actually is reference to Jesus Christ as the chief cornerstone, which is also viewed as the capstone of the Great Pyramid. And you can see this back in Isaiah chapter 19, which we'll get into that in a second. But I want to give you a little background on the Great Pyramid here and how this is going to tie into Joshua's long day. So this ties into a blog that I have that goes back to August 17th of 2015, which is the Great Pyramid, the boundary stone of the Promised Land. And so what you have is the Great Pyramid acting as a boundary stone, which marks off the borders of the Promised Land that Joshua was going in to conquer. And just first of all, a basic usage for the pyramids in Egypt, because landowners' boundaries were wiped away with every annual flooding of season of the Nile. This was when the Nile Delta part of Egypt was one of the most densely populated areas of the ancient world. We begin to see the importance of this aspect of the pyramid to the population of ancient Egypt. Their entire agricultural economy was based on the timing of the Nile's flood stages and the effect on the workable farmland of the Nile Delta. So the calendar almanac that arose from this function of the pyramids, along with the ability to quickly restore land boundaries obliterated by the floods, would have prevented ancient Egypt from descending into social chaos. So that was a basic function for the Great Pyramid and the other pyramids of the Giza Plateau, and how their shadows and reflections became a great sundial of Egypt, not only for days and hours, but also seasons of the year. And from a land surveyor's viewpoint, using the outlines of the pyramid on the horizon as reference points provided accurate boundaries that could be restored very simply with the use only of a cord and a stone weight, where the common people could redraw their land lines and do their farming and have their social order. So that's a key piece right there from the common man's point of view. Now, this graphic that John has up is actually the square in the middle is the Great Pyramid, and the two arms, the west arm and the east arm, are actually the sun's reflection going off into the eastern and western part of Egypt. And as we're going to see, and we're going to go now to the October 22nd blog and look at some of the graphics there, right, which is right next to the one we're looking at here. If you can see that, the big circle there is, you can see the Great Pyramid at the point, well, actually, let's just look at the graphic right above this, where it says the Mediterranean Sea, Plate 1, the Great Pyramid bisects the boundaries of the Nile Delta. So the Great Pyramid is right at the apex of the Nile Delta here. And you can see that from our previous graphic, the lines of the pyramid enclose the entire Nile Delta. And so what we're looking at is an extension of this, because the Great Pyramid and its chief cornerstone is actually the missing piece. There is no top to the Great Pyramid, and it's missing because it's actually covered in biblical prophecy, because Christ is not here right now. He's absent, but he's returning. And so the line, there's an angle here that if you look in the graphic, it says, and this is actually called the Christ angle, because there's two, if you look at the structure of the pyramid, there's two angles of the passages. One is the descending passage, which goes down to the base of the pyramid. You can see this if you scroll down a little bit. You can see a picture of the pyramid, Great Pyramid of Giza. And there's one entrance on the lower right-hand side of the pyramid that goes down to the subterranean chamber. So that angle is what's known as the Christ angle. And it's 26 degrees, 18 minutes, and 9.7 seconds. And if you take that angle and put it off from the first graphic, you put it off towards the east, and it heads, what it does is that line goes straight through Bethlehem, Jerusalem, and Mount Zion. And it's called the Bethlehem line. And so, there's prophecies about how God called his son out of Egypt. And this would have generally conformed to the path that Jesus and Joseph and Mary took to get into Egypt when they were fleeing Herod. So that part of the prophecy fits in together. But some of the pyramids' shadows appeared as arms on the ground, specifically the eastern and western arms of its solar noon reflections. And the pyramid's right arm resulted in a solar shadow that lay in close proximity to the Bethlehem's line. So on that first graphic that we looked at with the arms of the pyramid, it's behind the one that John's looking at right now, provides a corridor in which the Bethlehem line and Bethlehem and Jerusalem and Mount Zion all fall within that corridor. So at some date during the spring, the right arm of the noon reflection starts to align with the Bethlehem line. And this first part of the arm aligns in a way that the northern edge of the arm is followed by the alignment of the apex ridge of the arm, which could likewise be described as the apex ridge of the Bethlehem corridor. So basically, if you're looking at that arm, you have three lines that are marked off in there. You have the Bethlehem line. So on the top, you have the Bethlehem corridor, the line, there's a P, Q, and a R with different dimensions within that. And so that's what I'm saying. All those sites fall within real estate where this line crosses Jerusalem. It encapsulates Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and the Mount Zion, which is really key. And when we combine this fact with the line drawn from the map of Giza in the southeastern direction of the pyramid's apex, it intersects Mount Sinai where God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. Now, okay, I'm going to jump to a different graphic here because this is another element of pyramid's alignments. So again, we're going back to the one that we just switched away from, and right underneath the Bethlehem line circle there's another graphic, which is the Bethlehem line and Mount Sinai line from the Great Pyramid. And so that particular graphic. So what we're looking at is, you can see on here the 26 degrees, 18 minutes, and 9 seconds of the Bethlehem line. And so the lower line coming from pyramid is that same angle, but it's to the southeast instead of the northeast. And lo and behold, what does it cross over? Jabal al-Lawz, Mount Horeb, which is the place, obviously, where John taught on, that Mount Sinai, where Moses received the 10 Commandments, and a whole lot of other stuff happened. So what this does is it basically generates a triangle between the Mount Zion in Jerusalem, Mount Horeb, Jabal al-Lawz, and the Great Pyramid. And that little triangle right there, if you scroll down some more underneath the where you looked at the pyramid and its with its passages. If you look a couple more graphics underneath that, you'll see figure D, which is a triangle linking the altars of the Great Pyramid at Mount Zion and Mount Sinai. And so that is a really interesting thing that's going on here with this alignment of the different mountains and the man-made mountain of the Great Pyramid, which is holding the chief cornerstone, Jesus Christ, at the top. So in the author of one of the books that I referred to on here, which is in the references of the blogs, his gentleman's name is Lemes. He points out a double reference to the Lord's strong hand, and the scripture references Exodus 6, verse 1 to 8. If we read verse 1, it says, "Now, for the Lord said to Moses, now thou wilt see what I will do to Pharaoh, for with a strong hand he will let them go, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of his land." And God spoke to Moses and said, "I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name, the Lord, I was not known to them, and was also established my covenant with them and made them in the land of Canaan, their land of pilgrimage. I have remembered my covenant," it says in verse 5, "and I rescued them from their bondage," in verse 6, "and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. And I will take you as my people and be your God. And then you'll know that I am the Lord your God, who brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians and bring you into the land which I swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you as an heritage. I am the Lord." So what's kind of interesting is the author of the book actually notes how the Lord is talking to Moses, and what he did to Pharaoh was with a strong arm and a strong hand, he pulled off all these wonderful, miraculous actions that John recorded, in the Exodus. And so the author of the book points out the double reference to the Lord's strong hand as a deliverance for Israel, linking it to the dual alignment of the solar arm in the Bethlehem line. And I find that kind of interesting. So if he's right, then we have a direct link between the important lines originating from the Great Pyramid as the boundary stone of the Promised Land, and other key references in these verses where the Almighty establishes his covenant with Israel, and when God establishes something in his word, he repeats it. So God established the covenant with Abraham. He repeated it in Genesis chapter 15 and 17. He confirmed it with Moses, the deliverer of Israel, and he repeats his promise to give Israel the land of Canaan as an everlasting heritage marked by the boundary stone of the Great Pyramid. So if you look at some of these lines that we just saw on the other graphic from the Great Pyramid and the triangle, if you take these lines out, they encompass some areas that go to the Tigris and Euphrates, for example. They cover a very large chunk of real estate, which is far bigger than the land that, for example, Israel occupies today. They just have a little sliver of land between, like, the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. How am I doing on time, John?
Oh, you're going a little long, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, I just want to wrap this up. So if you check out the rest of this blog, you're going to see what I'm talking about as far as God has prepared a way for the Lord. He made straight away a highway through the desert for them to come through. And it all conforms to what we have here with the Bethlehem line. And Psalm 118, 14 to 24, Jehovah is my strength and song. He has become my salvation. The voice of rejoicing and salvation is in the tents of the righteous. The right hand of Jehovah does valiantly. The right hand of Jehovah is exalted. The right hand of Jehovah does valiantly. So there are some really strong references to the works of God and his right hand. His right hand man is Jesus Christ, the promised seed. And anyway, I thought that this would bless you. And if you kind of, have an opportunity to check out the boundary stone and some of these other links that I've provided, I think you'll get blessed to see the tie-in and how Isaiah 28 and Isaiah 19 really kind of cross over with some stupendous revelation here that will really bless you. So thanks very much.
All right. Well, how about that, everybody? You really get to see some real in-depth mysteries here. Isn't that interesting?